segment, CBS Sports NFL writer Tyler Sullivan here. All right, position battles within the AFC. We'll start with the AFC East and the Super Bowl favorites, the Bills there. What position battle are you watching with the Bills right now?
Yeah, as you said, Amanda, the Buffalo Bills had a heartbreaker in that playoff loss to the Kansas City Chiefs, and they know better than anybody else you need an offense that can possibly go down the field in 13 seconds or less to win a playoff game, to advance and possibly even win a Super Bowl. So let's stick on that side of the ball and let's look at the slot receiver position. We already know that this is going to be a loaded offense with Josh Allen under center, Stephon Diggs, a new highly paid outside receiver, his go-to target there. Gabe Davis is a young up-and-coming receiver there. Obviously, we saw in that game how special he could potentially be, but they've made some additions in the slot receiver spot, adding Jamison Crowder this offseason to a one-year deal. For my money, it's probably one of the most underrated signings that we've seen in the NFL. I mean, he was productive as a member of the New York Jets, and now he has Josh Allen as his quarterback. So to me, that is going to be fascinating to see how he ascends there. But don't sleep on Isaiah McKenzie battling for this spot. I was in Foxborough back earlier this season when he absolutely torched the New England Patriots secondary to the tune of 11 catches for 125 yards and a touchdown. Absolutely monster performance by him. And if they get any sort of consistent play like that, obviously to not those heights, but something a little bit more consistent from McKenzie, he is an electrifying player that can get open in short spurts in the middle of the field. So for me, the Bills probably want him to ascend. He's the younger player. They only have Jamison Crowder on a one-year deal, but Crowder is certainly a veteran that can come in, has the pedigree of elite play coming out of the slot that could be a benefit for Josh Allen there. So both of those guys will be interesting to watch over the course of training camp.
Bills heavy favorites win that division at -180. Right behind them, we find the Patriots tied with the Dolphins at +400. Position battle you're watching with the Patriots, it has to do with that crowded running back room.
Yeah, it does. And the Patriots are always good for a summer surprise, right? I mean, last year, we all thought it was going to be Cam Newton to start the year, and then all of a sudden he's cut, and it's Mac Jones out of the gate in week one. Maybe we get something like that this summer in the backfield. And, you can look at this from the top to bottom there with the Patriots backfield. Let's start with Damian Harris. He is the clear bell cow back, the starter for this team last year, led the team in touches, led the team in rushing yards. He is clearly the guy, but he is in the final year of his deal. The Patriots did draft 2 running backs at the NFL draft a few weeks ago, and they have Ramondre Stevenson, who could clearly ascend to a #1 running back role in this offense, was tremendous in those short spurts we saw last year when he received the bulk of the carries. So if all of a sudden Stevenson looks ready to ascend, there's maybe no long-term deals on the horizon there with Harris. Who knows? We've seen them deal Sony Michel to the Los Angeles Rams last summer. Is it possible they do something like that with Damian Harris this year? I wouldn't rule it out, even though the Patriots do love to run the ball there in that backfield. And as you go down that roster, James White, clear staple in this offense. That pass-catching role in New England out of the backfield has certainly been a go-to option, whether it's Shane Vereen, Kevin Falk, Dion Lewis, and James White's probably the most recent example of that. But they did draft Pierre Strong out of South Dakota in the 4th round. You got to remember, he was tied for the fastest 40 time at the NFL Scouting Combine among running backs. If he is ready to go and is good in pass protection early, and James White, who's coming back from that hip injury that forced him to miss a bulk of last season, you could see something go on there. If James White's healthy, maybe that's bad news for the likes of J.J. Taylor, another electrifying guy in that backfield.
Let's go to the Dolphins here. Word coming down today. Look, the Dolphins have been busier than most anybody this offseason. Word today, they're adding Sony Michel. They brought in Chase Edmonds, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle was already there. And this all rolls into the position-ish battle that you're watching for the Dolphins.
Yeah, I mean, we can look at the running backs and say, all right, who's going to be the guy and all that, but we all want to know who's going to be Tua's #1 option, right? Is it going to be Tyreek Hill? Is it going to be Jalen Waddle? Who is going to be the #1 guy, and who's going to have that great rapport with Tua? It's not only important for the Miami Dolphins as they contend in the AFCs with the Bills and the Patriots and possibly even the Jets. It's important for fantasy too. If I want to know who's going to be that guy that I'm drafting in the 2nd, possibly 3rd round, who knows, maybe even back end of the 1st round of fantasy drafts later this summer. For me, Waddle has clearly the rapport with Tua. It was the #6 overall pick last year, has a full season under their belt working together, but there's no question that Tyreek Hill, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, an all-pro receiver, someone who can absolutely fly. The biggest question is, how is that going to translate going from Patrick Mahomes to Tua Tagovailoa? A clear drop-off in quarterback play. So that's the only thing that gives you pause. Does the rapport that Waddle have with that year of experience with Tua help him early on? And how quickly can Tyreek Hill immerse himself into this offense? It starts now with OTAs and minicamp in the next month. And if they can get things going over the course of that time and in preseason and training camp, then maybe they can hit out of the gate running. But for me right now, Waddle probably has the inside track to be the most productive out of the gate.
How long do you give Tua? If you hand him all of these weapons, here it is, Tua, and he doesn't perform, what's the next step?
Well, I mean, at that point, right, you're pushing Tom Brady's, broadcasting career down the line, and maybe you're going after him when he becomes a free agent next offseason. For me, that's what you got to do. You probably move on at that point. There were rumblings that was the possible case there if things, went differently in Miami. Maybe it was Sean Payton and Tom Brady at that point when they, at the start of this season, if the Buccaneers would let him go. Didn't happen. He's back after 40 days in retirement, but you never know what the future brings with Tom Brady. Heck, I didn't think he was going to be in the broadcast booth. So you know what? If he heads back to the AFC East, just not with the Patriots, nothing would surprise me at this point.
If we could all make $375 million doing somewhat of what we do right now, we'll take even a fraction of that, a fifth of that. Let's go to the Jets here. This is one of these teams that can make potentially a big jump this season. They have so many weapons now. What is the position battle here with the Jets that you're watching?
Yeah, I absolutely love what the Jets did this offseason, particularly at the NFL draft. They just seemed to fill every single need that they had to for a team that's continuing to rebuild. It's not an overnight, fix for this team. It's going to take multiple years. But for me, it's the wide receiver position and towards the back end of that roster and how it's going to play out for Zach Wilson. It's extremely important, very similar to what we were talking about with Tua Tagovailoa. The Jets need to surround Zach Wilson with as much talent as humanly possible. So at the back end of that wide receiver position, Elijah Moore, Corey Davis, Garrett Wilson, their first-round pick this year, those guys are the locks. Those are going to be the starting three in the pecking order. But what's going to happen with the likes of Braxton Berrios and Denzel Mims? Braxton Berrios last year was number 3 on the team in targets, number 2 on the team in receptions. He's a clear guy that could work out in the slot and really kind of be that go-to target, right? If you get first and short or third and short and something along those lines, he could be a good outlet for the likes of Zach Wilson. But Denzel Mims is the sleeper here. I mean, the Jets did spend a second-round pick in him in 2020, and he just hasn't really been able to see the field so much. He wasn't productive last year, wasn't really able to hit the field in his rookie year. But if all of a sudden he comes into training camp in the best shape of his life, the Jets are going to look at that and say, hey, listen, we invested heavily in this type of a talent going in the second round and selecting him a couple of years ago. They're going to want to see something of a return on that investment, or at least give every opportunity to get something in that investment. So again, Berrios, certainly impactful, was a great kind of rapport with Wilson last year, a factor on special teams, which will certainly help him. But again, if Mims shows anything, I think the Jets will explore that.
Tyler, hang on just a second. As I said, we're working it through every AFC team, recapping what he has going on, the position battles with each team in the AFC East there. The Bills looking at their wide receivers there. Jamison Crowder versus Isaiah McKenzie. New England Patriots, what to do with that crowded running back room. The Dolphins, so many weapons for Tua. Who will be his number 1 target? And the Jets, a couple of wide receivers there as well. Let's welcome back in Tyler Sullivan here. AFC position battles, and we are landing in the AFC West now. Let's start with the Chiefs. Look, I went through all of that with their wide receivers here. Specifically, what are you looking for in this position battle?
Yeah, it's really the pecking order. Like, how is this going to go down? Who is going to be Patrick Mahomes' go-to target with all of these new weapons? I mean, there is 159 targets on the table that Tyreek Hill left as he head down to Miami in that trade with the Dolphins. And how are those going to get divvied up? Obviously Travis Kelce could be factored into this, but clearly we need to see what kind of wide receivers are going to establish themselves. And you can make the case really for either one of them. I mean, Juju Smith-Schuster has probably the most experience, has a 1,000-yard season under his belt with the Pittsburgh Steelers a few years ago. He's trying to reestablish himself as a clear-cut number 1 wide receiver in the NFL after being limited to 5 games last year due to a shoulder injury. He's trying to come back healthy and earn a big money deal now that he's on a 1-year contract with the Chiefs. Mecole Hardman is someone who has the experience of actually playing with Patrick Mahomes, so that possibly gives him an inside track at how things look in the Chiefs offense, maybe helps him over the course of the summer and training camp and maybe early on in the season, because he's, Mahomes probably looking at somebody that he actually knows that he's throwing to. So possibly that helps him. You look at Marquez Valdez-Scantling. He's somebody that I think is going to adopt the deep routes that Tyreek Hill left. Obviously, he's the type of burner that could help stretch the field, something very similar that Tyreek Hill did. So there is that aspect that I think he could adopt, but let's see what kind of route tree develops for him beyond just running as fast as he can down the field and letting Patrick Mahomes uncork it 45, 50 yards down the field. And then you look at Sky Moore, and we've seen over the course of the past few years here, second-round picks can make immediate impacts. I mean, you look at the guys that are in the NFL right now: DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown, Deebo Samuel. All of those guys were second-round picks, making almost immediate impacts to their teams in year one. Again, it'll be tough to do so when you have an experienced and crowded wide receiver room that the Chiefs have right now. But if he starts to establish himself early on and he's impressing, that's somebody that the Chiefs, again, invested heavily in the second round. Very high value pick there. He's somebody that you got to keep an eye on, not only for like fantasy, but for dynasty leagues and all of that stuff as well. But this is a very competitive division here where these offenses are completely revamped. You're going to need all the help you can get. And if you can get a rookie to have an impact in day one, that's going to be huge for Kansas City.
And just a couple days ago, they also signed Justin Ross on May 7th, who was an undrafted free agent, didn't get drafted there. All right, let's go to the Chargers here. What position group, or position battle, I should say, are you watching with the Chargers?
Yeah, I'm looking for the second running back spot. Obviously, Austin Eckler's a stud. He's going to be the guy for Justin Herbert, the lead guy, the starter, and all of that. Passing downs, goal line, all of that. But you still need some depth behind there. And Justin Jackson, who's kind of been that guy over the last few years, is still out there in the free agent market. I guess there's a possibility that he could be re-signed at some point, especially if there's an injury. But right now, they haven't done so. Right now, they have Joshua Kelly, and they have second-round pick Isaiah Spiller. For me, he's the guy to keep an eye on there as well. Again, like I said, when you draft heavily in these guys in the second, first, obviously, third rounds, you're expecting them to make somewhat of an immediate impact. And when he was with the Aggies, a couple of 1,000-yard seasons there for them. So for me, he's going to have the inside track at all this. They're going to make sure that he is in the best position possible for if there's an event where Austin Eckler gets hurt, he could be a guy that potentially steps up and is a factor in that backfield for Justin Herbert in this offense. And again, like I said, this is a big spot here for fantasy. We look at handcuffs all the time at the running back spot. If I can get Isaiah Spiller later rounds, that's somebody I'm keeping an eye on if he wins that number 2 spot, because Austin Eckler hasn't been the most durable guy over the course of his career. So this is a very important position for the Chargers.
Tied with the Chargers to win the Super Bowl, they're 16-1 odds. We find the Denver Broncos. Everybody now on board with Russell Wilson here. And everybody, really wants to perform well with this team now. So what position battle is going down that you're keeping a close eye on?
Yeah, like I said, it's about these offenses because, again, everybody's loaded up in this division all of a sudden. It was like an arms race between the Chargers, the Raiders, the Chiefs. Everybody's going crazy. The Denver Broncos, key among them, obviously acquiring Russell Wilson this season. But now we have to look at who he's possibly throwing to. Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, Courtland Sutton. Those are the clear 3 guys there. You can see who's going to, establish themselves as the number 1 guy, possibly Jerry Jeudy, but Tim Patrick and obviously Courtland Sutton, they have a claim to that as well. But let's look at back end of that roster there as well, because you have to be deep in a division like this. And so there's a bunch of guys that you look at. KJ Hamler is probably a 4th wide receiver for them. But you look down the list, Travis Fulgham to me is somebody that you keep an eye on that could possibly contend for that last, maybe final spot, whether they go 4 wide receivers or if they go 5. He's competing with Kendall Hinton, Seth Williams. But Fulgham, to me, you'll say, I know that name. Who is Travis Fulgham? What was he from again? You go back to 2020, he was probably a fantasy football darling for a couple of weeks with the Philadelphia Eagles. He had 500 yards receiving, just was a practice squad player a year ago. But if he comes in and is somewhat of a factor over the course of the summer. And again, when you have better quarterback play, it not only helps the elite guys put up insane numbers, but it helps those guys that were practice squatters a year before, or people that are just hanging on, maybe not as talented to be a game breaker like Fulgham is. He's a quality receiver, but not somebody that's a clear-cut number 1. That's going to make his life a ton easier. So with that type of production that he's already had in the NFL, like you saw in 2020, over 500 yards receiving, he's somebody that I'm keeping an eye on in that back end of that receiving depth chart there for Denver.
The Raiders, as we just saw in those odds, plus 675 at the very bottom to win this division. We've looked a lot at these offensive weapons with a lot of these teams. With the Raiders, you're looking at the right tackle position.
Yeah, because as much as we're talking about the offense, this division has loaded up with pass rushers. Khalil Mack's now here. Randy Gregory's now here. The Chiefs spent a first-round pick on a pass rusher. So the Raiders, they got to protect Derek Carr, right? I mean, that is a clear indication here. You know, he's not the, you know, I'm probably being a little bit more discriminatory than I should be, but he's the worst quarterback in the division, even though he's extremely talented. You know, Russell Wilson, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, they're all better. So he needs to have a clean pocket to contend with these guys. So I'm looking at the right tackle spot, and specifically Alex Leatherwood. He was the first-round pick a year ago, number 17 overall out of Alabama. He started the year at right tackle, but then was kicked inside at right guard. I think that the Raiders, under Josh McDaniels, will try to revisit that, and he's going to compete with Brandon Parker, who's the incumbent who took his place over the course of the season last year. So the battle between those guys as to who is going to establish themselves as the starter, to me, makes a lot of sense. I think Leatherwood will, again, have the inside track, first-round pedigree. They're going to want more than just a right guard when you take somebody at number 17 overall. But one other name I would keep an eye on if things go completely awry, and that's Jermaine Illuminor. He is, you know, at best probably a swing tackle. It's probably where he's most likely suited on an NFL roster. But it is worth noting that he was starting 8 games at right tackle for the New England Patriots back in 2020 when, of course, Josh McDaniels was the offensive coordinator there under Bill Belichick. It was under duress, under injuries and all of that, but he was able to play at somewhat of a solid level. If things go completely awry at the top of that depth chart, I will be curious to see if Josh McDaniels just goes back to something that he knows in Illuminor.
Tyler, our producer Noah, wants to throw one more thing at you, taking a look at the odds to win this division there. As we mentioned, look, the Chiefs are the favorite. They've been the favorite. They will still be the favorite. You throw guys like Russell Wilson into the mix. I'm not entirely sure how much faith you have in him. Who would be your pick to win this division?
Well, I mean, you got to look at the Chargers there as well. I mean, you look at how much they've spent this offseason. They were already a talented roster, right? I mean, they have Justin Herbert ascending as one of the best young quarterbacks in the NFL, and then you surround him with weapons on the defensive side of the ball, like Khalil Mack, like J.C. Jackson. For me, that is what's going to be huge here. We already knew the offense is going to be able to put up points. I mean, you know, he is a talented enough quarterback with Keenan Allen, with Austin Eckler, with Mike Williams, who they've brought back, that they'll be able to compete with the Russell Wilsons, with the Patrick Mahomes, and with the Derek Carrs of sorts. But it's the defensive side of the ball that was their Achilles heel last year. I think they were bottom of the league in efficiency in DVOA in that regard. Now that you've established a clear number 1 corner in J.C. Jackson, you have a legit pass rusher in Khalil Mack, who's still vying for that first Super Bowl. For me, that's a team I'm paying attention to. And the Raiders, I don't even think are bad value there as well. They've spent big as well. They might not have the best quarterback in the division, but he's still thrown to Devontae Adams, who's arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL. And you go out there and you get Chandler Jones to go alongside with Max Crosby. That is a pretty dangerous pass rushing unit that the Raiders will have next season as well.
The division is stacked. The entire AFC is absolutely stacked heading into this next season. Tyler, thank you so much. Recapping the position battles he's watching with these teams in the AFC West, the Kansas City Chiefs. Look, the wide receivers, the package.
Well, after a pretty disastrous season that saw them miss the playoffs, the Browns moved on from Baker Mayfield and traded for Deshaun Watson. Clearly an upgrade, but how many games is Watson going to miss? A potential suspension looming over his first season with the Browns. They also went out, traded for Amari Cooper. They signed Denzel Ward, their cornerback, to a 5-year, $100 million extension. They did lose Jarvis Landry when they released him. They drafted wide receiver out of Purdue in David Bell in the 3rd round, number 99 overall. Let's get Will Brinson in here, host of the Pick Six podcast. We're talking position battles to watch in the AFC North. Let's start with the Browns, and Will, you're looking to that wide receiver position.
I tell you what, Chris, when you look at the... Sorry,
Amanda told me you were fired up.
I am pretty fired up. I'm drinking some cold brew, counting down the minutes so I can crack a beer and get ready for this Canes game tonight. Hope to take down those horrendous Bruins. At any rate, I'm going to go slot wide receiver here. I think it's kind of interesting. You could look at defensive tackle potentially. and maybe that second edge position. They traded for Chase Winovich this offseason. But I think slot wide receiver is really fascinating to look at, not just from a micro positional battle perspective, but from a macro standpoint on what the Browns are reportedly doing this offseason, which is completely reworking their offense to go from a Baker Mayfield run-centric offense to a Deshaun Watson's here. We're going to wing it around a little bit more, maybe operate with more wide receivers on the field and less in those tight end heavy formations. And I think the biggest matchup maybe to watch is rookie David Bell, who was drafted, versus Jakeem Grant. Maybe throw Juwan Mims in there as well. If we're going to have more 3 wide receiver sets from the Browns, it's going to be imperative that they get these guys out there. And I think you could see a lot of utilization of these guys in short yardage areas, maybe stretch the field sometimes, but get them the ball in space and see what they can do. Bell is a guy they used an early round pick on and could very well slot in as the starting slot wide receiver when they release that depth chart.
Yeah, he has some huge games as a member of the Purdue Boilermakers. Interesting to see how he does at the NFL level. Let's move to another AFC North team where you're looking in the wide receiver room. It feels like we've been doing that for years with the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson, who has Mark Andrews at tight end. But what's a wide receiver battle that you're looking at this year?
Well, I mean, I think you can kind of look at it in its totality, right? They traded Hollywood Brown during the draft for, to the Cardinals to reunite him with Kyler Murray. That leaves Lamar Jackson now with, by my count, Rashad Bateman, Devin DuVernay, James Prochet, and Tywan Wallace. Now, the last two are probably not going to be household names. I loved him coming out of college. Like, Prochet at SMU was really, really fun to watch. And Tywan Wallace, before he tore his ACL at Oklahoma State, was a really dynamic, one of really college football's most dynamic receivers. So those two guys make this kind of interesting. I think we're probably going to see just how the Ravens operate. The most run-heavy team, I think HQ or NFL and CBS tweeted out earlier today, they're like 2,000 more rush attempts than anyone else since 2018. It's just ridiculous. So we're not going to be talking about a ton of wide receivers on the field for Baltimore, most on any given play. But you got to have the depth there. You want to develop some more talent. It's not like DuVernay, no offense, is like an elite number 2. And Rashad Bateman does need to prove himself to be a number 1. So I find this area of the Ravens depth chart extremely interesting. Don't think it would be shocking if they actually decided to bring in maybe somebody else off those free agent streets.
Yeah, there is a report, and several, in fact, that they might be interested in Jarvis Landry. What do you think he could do for the Ravens?
I'd be a perfect fit, really, because you give sort of a guy who operates underneath, gives Lamar those easy looks, maybe lets Andrews carry the seam a little bit more as he's cutting across and defenses are collapsing down on him. I think it makes a absolute perfect fit, frankly.
All right, let's move on to the defending AFC champion Cincinnati Bengals. What position group are you watching there?
Actually, Chris, we refer to them as the Super Bowl losing Cincinnati Bengals in this household. That's right. We don't recognize that title because we got to talk about the big game. With the Bengals, I actually asked John Breach where to go when we were talking about the Bengals. And his first mention was left guard, can Jackson Carman keep that job, hold on to his gig? He also thinks cornerback is going to be interesting as well because of bringing the draft picks. Can they nab one of those starting jobs? They got some, it was the big thing they needed to address in the draft after tackling offensive line in free agency. But for me, I look at tight end. You have Hayden Hurst, who they brought in, and then they also have Drew Sample going into his 4th year after being a 2nd-round pick. We saw with C.J. Uzomah left in free agency, of course, man, he was really, really important for that Bengals team last year. I mean, he was a guy that was so capable on 3rd down of getting open, becoming Joe Burrow's sort of go-to conversion stick-moving tight end. And so what will we get from Drew Sample? Can he finally break out? Can Hayden Hurst, live up to the 1st-round promise? Remember, the Ravens drafted him before they took Lamar Jackson. So I think that tight end position is very fascinating for the Bengals because of how important it seems to be in Zach Taylor's offense, especially on those 3rd down spots.
Appears to be a 3-horse race in that division with the Steelers bringing up the rear. And I would think that you're going to go with the quarterback position as the position battle to watch with Mitch Trubisky, the presumed starter going into the season, but the Steelers the only team to use a 1st-round pick on a quarterback in the draft.
Yeah, this is one of those where I was like, oh, thank God, I actually don't have to do any work for this pick. I can just say quarterbacks and go and not even look at the rest of the roster, quite frankly. And let's put some respect on Mason Rudolph's name. I think he is technically involved in that quarterback battle. Now, it's more likely coming down to between Kenny Pickett and Mitchell Trubisky. And wouldn't it be some sweet, sweet irony if Mitchell Trubisky got Mitchell Trubisky'd after signing as a free agent with another team, they go and draft somebody in the first round, and he takes that job, just like Trubisky did to my buddy Mike Glennon. I think what's most likely is Trubisky starts the season and then Pickett comes in. That's just what we see teams do it all the time. But it wouldn't shock me at all if Kenny Pickett, remember, like, I know this is kind of a weird thing, but I still think it matters. Like, he's playing in the same field. He's practicing in the same facility. He's lived in the city. He's not doing anything new. That's a huge advantage, like, geographic-wise, for a guy who's making the transition from college to pros. I mean, he has the same support system. He's near his family. I mean, to me, that's a big, big deal when you're making that leap to becoming a pro player. You're moving 12 feet over. That's how far the doors are at the practice facility from the Pitt Panthers to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Different team, of course, and a different battle, but I think it's a pretty big advantage, and I wouldn't be shocked at all if Kenny Pickett won the job in training camp. Really?
So ultimately, I mean, how many games do you see a healthy Kenny Pickett starting this season for the Steelers?
I mean, I would set it at, I would guess 17.
Wow.
But I would set the over-under at probably like 10.5, if I were making the odds.
Okay, so Will Brinson thinks he might win that job right out of training camp, Kenny Pickett, because you're not the only one of our experts to mention that. Playing in the very same stadium, just like a door down to a different locker room and just a little different area for the Pittsburgh Steelers as opposed to the Pittsburgh Panthers. Will Brinson taking a look at some of the position battles in the AFC North with the Cleveland Browns. He's looking at slot wide receiver, the rookie David Bell against Jakeem Grant, who came over from the Bears. Also a wide receiver battle with the Baltimore Ravens. They need a couple to step up big time, though they might bring in Jarvis Landry. Reportedly, there is interest between the Ravens and Jarvis Landry, and could be a good fit there. The Bengals, the tight end room, Drew Sample and Hayden Hurst replacing C.J. Uzomah. Pick Six podcast with Will Brinson is available wherever you find your... Let's bring in Will Brinson. We're looking at position battles now in the AFC South, and let's start with the Tennessee Titans. I mean, I think this is something that a lot of people are looking at down the road as could be a battle for Ryan Tannehill. Do you think it starts in training camp?
I think that Ryan Tannehill has to successfully hold off Malik Willis in training camp. And I don't think it'll be that hard, Chris. Look, Malik Willis is going to be new to the scheme, making a massive leap from Liberty to professional football. I know in 2020 he played here in Raleigh against NC State, and, COVID year, weird year, but it looked like a little overmatched at times against, what amounts to a high-level defense. And so, I just think there's going to be a big transition there. And so it would be surprising, extremely surprising, if he just flat out beat out Ryan. Look at that. We got the pack highlight going there. If he just beat out Ryan Tannehill in training camp. But I do think that the easiest comp here, quite frankly, is the Joe Flacco comp. This is what happened when the Ravens drafted Lamar Jackson. Joe Flacco was like, I'm not mentoring this guy. And, what had happened on the, sort of in the back end there that people weren't aware of is that clearly Ryan Tannehill and his staff and his camp had approached the Titans about a contract extension, got no interest because of his age and perhaps even his performance to close out the season against the Bengals in the playoffs last year. And so they're moving forward with trying to develop a new young quarterback. Now, at the same time, we're not talking about a first-round pick. This is a third-round pick, so there's no rush, no pressure from fans to go out there and play him unless Tannehill really just falls apart. So while it's a fun battle to talk about, probably less of an actual battle in training camp than one would think about.
Okay, let's move on to the Indianapolis Colts, who brought in Matt Ryan at quarterback. Your position battle to watch is on the offensive line.
Yeah, left tackle spot here because they have Matt Pryor, who the Indy Star reported is going to get first crack at the position. And then they also drafted Bernard Ryman, who I believe is a converted tight end, was thought about as a possible first rounder, but eventually, could play guard, might be the long-term left tackle. And then today, actually, they signed Dennis Kelly, who had filled in for Taylor Lewan a lot for Tennessee last year. So this is a key spot for the Colts, right? If you're talking about you shore up that left tackle position with Quentin Nelson on the inside on the left side and then Braden Smith out there on the right, and you got Jonathan Taylor in the backfield, you put Matt Ryan behind a good offensive line with some decent weapons of Jonathan Taylor, this Frank Reich offense is going to cook. So I really applaud Chris Ballard and Frank Reich for doing this, for bringing in a lot of competition at that position. If Ryman can just straight out win the job, like he plays that well in camp, that he wins the left tackle job, you're thrilled. But you could certainly rotate him in as a backup along some guard positions, at swing tackle work, and then you let one of these veterans stand in there and give you some ample protection for Matt Ryan's backside. It's an interesting to watch though, because remember, Eric Fisher last year coming into the season was dealing with an injury, and we just didn't know how they'd be able to protect Carson Wentz. Yada yada yada. They lose to Jacksonville in Week 18.
Talking position battles to watch in the AFC South. Will Brinson picking one from each team. Let's move to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And you're looking at a position battle I think a lot of us thought we were going to get a year ago when Urban Meyer elected to use a first-round pick on a running back.
Yeah, I was going to dive into the defensive tackle position with Jacksonville, but then I thought, I got to text Briscoe and ask him what he thinks about these guys. And I really feel like dealing with Pete. It's May. Hopefully I don't want to think about it until August.
Yeah, he's in hibernation anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's bears climbing to their cave. Pete's like pulled down the lid on his tanning bed, and he'll see you in August. I think with the Jaguars, running back is an interesting one, though, because Travis Etienne, first-round pick last year. James Robinson, right, I believe undrafted and, came on strong his rookie season. Obviously, Urban Meyer wasn't a big fan. And then you also have Snoop Connor, who was, I think, a fifth-round pick for them this year. Now, what's interesting is that Doug Peterson traditionally has not utilized a feature back in his offense. He likes to rotate these guys around. We were also under the impression that Travis Etienne was going to be used in a Percy Harvin, like split out wide type of role under Urban Meyer. What is Doug Peterson going to do with him? Is James Robinson going to be the lead back with Etienne as sort of the third down back? Will they just let Etienne be the feature back? Will Snoop Connor get a bunch of carries because he's the only guy drafted by this regime, sort of? Balky was involved last year in the selection. I mean, Etienne would be the guy I'd lean on, but I think it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out just because of Doug Peterson's history of the position and the timeline from which all three of these guys were acquired. Etienne
did not play a single regular season game last season, injured in the preseason after being taken 25th overall out of Clemson. All right, last team in the AFC South, and it's probably the team that's going to come in last place, more than likely, the Houston Texans. What's a position battle you're watching for the Texans?
Yeah, so right tackle and offensive guard is the interesting spot for the Texans. And look, there's probably 50 different position battles of interest on the defensive side of the ball. But I really want to focus in on this one because I think with Laramie Tunsil on the left side, and let's see what happens next offseason with Laramie Tunsil, because you could be seeing one of these guys who plays right tackle moving to left tackle, or the guy who loses the job as the left tackle next year if they move on from Tunsil. Titus Howard, of course, their former high draft pick, played right tackle most of the time throughout his tenure with the Houston Texans. And then they pick up Kenyon Green early in this draft. I think they would like, in a perfect world, for Kenyon Green to win the job and be ready to play left tackle, and maybe they move Howard back to right tackle. But at the same time, you could also slot Green in as, the right guard if A.J. McCann is your left guard, and then you have Titus Howard playing out on the right side. So I think, Lovie Smith talked about this at length recently, and Texans fans are clamoring for Titus Howard to be the guy on the right. But Lovie made it very clear that this is a wide open battle. And so then you would have a trickle down effect of whoever loses the battle is then competing with McCann or working with McCann, I guess more likely to be left guard versus right guard. A lot of shuffling going on there for this team of great interest around the NFL.
Yeah, Texans still very much in rebuild mode. The Jaguars hope to take that next step forward. You got the Colts and the Titans, though, as the two teams most are looking at that could potentially win this division. Who would you take at this point?
Oh, I think we talked about this on the Pick Six podcast, which you're going to watch live on YouTube today. You can, listen to it on audio form on Wednesday. The Colts at even money is just a good bet with the way they built out this team this offseason and reloaded it. The coaching they have. If you can not buy into Matt Ryan all you want, but he showed plenty on film for a bad Falcons team last year and should be rejuvenated on this roster. I also think Colts, who, by the way, check out John Breach's strength of schedule story on CBSSports.com, had the easiest strength of schedule in the AFC. I think Colts minus 160 to make the playoffs is a pretty good bet as well when you start kind of running through your head the machinations of how these divisions might play out.
Okay, Will Brinson going with even money Indianapolis Colts there to win the division and end that 2-year reign for the Tennessee Titans. Will Brinson right here with us on HQ looking at some of the position battles in the AFC South. We talked about Ryan Tannehill against Malik Willis and how maybe Malik Willis doesn't win that job this season, but Ryan Tannehill is going to be faced with some pressure in training camp. Definitely has to perform better than he did at the end of last season. Colts left tackle position, and so on and so forth. Will Brinson can be heard on the Pick Six podcast. Download and follow wherever you like to get your audio.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.